Sam, thank you for joining us again.
My pleasure. Yeah, thanks
I
for having
know
me.
we had a few eventful days in the past, but one topic I want to bring up, which comes up a lot in conversations with CISOs, is AI and LLMs and ChatGPT. I think it's top of mind for a lot of people, just because a lot of cybersecurity executives, but also people in technology, think it's the third wave. First being the internet, then the mobile, and just by how fast the technology is evolving, people think that our lives, kind of on the personal level, company level, corporate level, government level, will be impacted, if not reshaped, by this technology. But I think it's certainly a lot more nuanced than that, and I think it will be specific implications for various aspects of cybersecurity. And I just want to get your
Oh yeah,
perspective on the topic.
yeah. So I've done actually done a lot of research here and some deep thinking around it. And I'm happy to dive into this with you. So the first is that there are many areas where I think the AI toolkit, I think we should refer to it as a toolkit, because it's not artificial intelligence in the classic sense. LLMs are part of that, where it can apply, and we can dive into them. But it's important to mention, first of all, it has been applied for a long time. If 2 years ago I had stood on a stage and talked about machine learning as AI, people would have been like, "Stop, you're exaggerating." Now we routinely see people stand on stage and talk about AI, and they're referring not even to machine learning; they're often referring to algorithms or simple correlation. And so it's a very big toolkit as it's being abused right now. But LLMs definitely fit the bill. And I think that we're at the beginning of it if it's a wave, as you've just described it. And it's interesting that you describe waves, because over the years, people used to have pointed out different waves that we might look back and go, really, that was a wave? Microcomputers were one at one point, right? And you mentioned mobile, but at one point, cloud computing was one. And so I think it's only history that tells us if we're really in a wave or not. At the moment, things look like that. And I suspect that a number of factors around the artificial intelligence toolkit, specifically really large data sets, new ways of modeling, advances in LLMs, but also deep learning and some other things, is really going to make this one of those things. So that's it. Now let's look at where it's applied. Machine learning in particular has been applied in defense in two very important areas. One is anti-malware and one is anti-fraud. And I don't just mean recently, I mean for 20 years. And the thing is that in offense, these toolkits have been applied for a while. It didn't just start with, LLMs and generative AI and ChatGPT, that this stuff has been happening for quite a bit. And so it's not so much what the security industry should be concerned about as that it is happening. And the symptom is what we can see. It is an increasing genetic and phenotypic diversity. So you're seeing more interesting malware emerge in terms of source code and in terms of object code. You're also seeing more effective, especially at the human-machine interface, development of tools like phishing. You're seeing more faster cycles for development and more effective cycles for development of tools, and better automation is probably the way I'd put it. So how do we know that? We can see the results in the cybercrime community. We can see the results in what they're doing, which implies those tools exist. It's not simply, linear advancement in engineering. We can see that that's happening. And we can also see it, that we've been using this stuff in defense. We can also see the effectiveness of that dropping. And largely what we've got to do is to make some probably linear improvements in how we do that. But it means in particular getting the human out of the middle of the loop in anti-fraud and anti-malware in particular. How do we get the efficiencies in there and broaden it? Now, actually, I think we're entering a phase where we're going to see some really interesting and exciting stuff come out for the defenders for a change. I think it's in the medium to long term, there are some areas that can gain us human time back, so that talent gap can begin to be addressed and we can up-level a lot of jobs. For instance, the GRC world. In the world of GRC, the natural language to policy translation, we can save a ton of time, evidence collection, ton of time, auditing, ton of time. We can get all those tools out, but this is huge. This is not a small thing.
Do you think something
also
like
policy management, like that,
right,
that's a big deal.
But also alert fatigue is one thing that comes up frequently often. So I would wouldn't you
Well,
think
guided
that,
offense and guided defense, both,
right,
right? It's this, the term Copilot came out, but let's be careful because
exactly.
Copilot might wind up a trademark or something. But the point is predictive breach analysis, predictive next step in attack chains, suggested responses. But we also have to be super careful because anything that is automated or begins to smack of automated becomes predictable, and predictability is a weakness when you have an adversary who's intelligent. In other words, if they know, it's like when you play chess. If you mirror the opponent, your moves become a weakness because they know what you're going to do next and they can set you up because there's actually asymmetry. And even in chess, it may look symmetrical, but it's asymmetrical. And cyber conflict is the very definition of asymmetrical conflict. Attackers don't do the same thing as defenders do. And this is also why we need to make sure that we have, just like certified ethical hacking, we have to have certified ethical AI use, or AI toolkit use, so that the red teams are doing exactly what the attackers will do as they build their toolkits, and the yellow teams do. So blue teams cut their teeth against real adversaries, not just, static tool use.
So do you think eventually will be, when people talk about AI, they often, the term that they use is the agent, which is essentially a program that's smart enough to make human-like decisions, aggregating tools, aggregating data in real time and learning exponentially. And it seems like at the end of the day, it will be two agents battling each other.
One day, yeah. However, I don't think we're there yet. I think we're at best looking at expert systems, but I think we're entering an age of assisted humans. Gary Kasparov once said that first he lost his first chess game to Deep Blue, and then he won more than he lost, and then he lost more than he won. And then he said, but there was a phase of about 10 years where assisted humans, where a machine was helping a human select among options, was the most powerful chess game in the world. Now, after 10 years, machines just won. But a chess game, for all it has, a huge number space associated with it, has got far less variables than, say, a computer network, right? It's not just 8 by 8 with, 32 pieces. There are many more pieces and many more squares and more dimensions. And so in theory, it's a much bigger number space. Now the machines are more sophisticated now, but so who knows how long it will take, but there is a period we're entering where AI assisted humans on both sides are going to become the norm, I think, in cyber conflict. That's not that radical of prediction, by the way.
Interesting.
Now we need to get ready for it. That's where the innovation should be happening.
And the timeline for something like this, I mean, it's obviously evolving, and
now how mature it is, how effective it is a different question. I also think it's time for us to start really thinking at societal and corporate levels about how we embrace AI. I came up with a new term and almost threw up in my mouth a little bit when I said it, but I came up with the term shadow AI the other day, just like we used to have shadow IT. If we don't, and we create, second-rate private AI in organizations, then people just go around it. They're going to find a way to bring the AI to do the work, because let's not work on the assumption people don't want to do work. Let's work on the assumption they want to do the best job that they can. And what and if you make that assumption, by the way, it explains a lot of human behaviors on networks. And I mean the accidental insiders, the people that accidentally lose stuff. It's because they're trying to do their job. They're trying to work the long hours.
They also want to do it fast. They also want to do it faster and take the shortcut because it saves them a day rather than,
or be the best at it, or save a day, right? Those lazy humans. It's also known as efficiency. It's understanding human behavior as opposed to judging human behavior, I think, is super important, neither good nor bad. And so if you make it hard to use external AI, or you produce a second-rate internal AI, then they're going to go right around you, just like they did with IT, and they're going to go and do it anyway. And then you get all the risks associated with using the public AI in the first place.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, people are talking about in terms of LLMs, kind of internal LLMs on the corporate level, people talking about data poisoning and people are already thinking about applications that are kind of LLMs that are specific to an organization and how to protect the data so that the malicious actor doesn't introduce part of a data set that will create those hallucinations and make
or predict the hallucinations and get ahead of it. There's one terrible one, which is people using it for programming. If you've ever tried to write simple code, you run into a number of problems if you don't have enough tokens, for instance, in memory, or enough memory allocated. hallucinations begin. It doesn't remember the whole conversation, so it sort of infers it, which is startling to people the first time they're using it. And now,
It's like
if
an
you
Alzheimer for an AI, right?
and it sort of forgets the other part of the conversation. Now, if you're doing this and it hallucinates the name of a DLL or a library or what have you, and you know it's going to do this as an attacker, you can go and actually create that DLL. You can create that web service. Let it sit out there. You can reference it in other places to make it more likely it will hallucinate it, or reference it, and now you've done some kleptography through hallucination, which is horrific. I mean, so the boundaries of AIs have to be thought in the threat modeling, and we've only begun to think about that.
Interesting. Well, it's definitely a rapidly evolving space. On a practical note, for a CISO, let's say at a financial institution, at a bank, next 6 months, as far as AI, LLMs, ChatGPT are concerned, what would you recommend? Whether it's low-hanging fruit or some of the areas, actionable areas that CISOs should be thinking about or creating action plans and acting on.
Well, I think there's several levels to think about it at. One is you better pay attention to the policy and legal side. There's something happening there in your jurisdiction. The second is corporate. Be part of the corporate conversation, because you've got to think about how is the corporate policy about the AI toolkit going to affect what you do, and how do you secure whatever comes out, and then come up with your strategy for what you're going to do. Also, I think that there's a big budget problem. I mean, the average CISO is, most of their budget is what's called statutory budget. They don't have much discretion in how those funds get spent. They're spent on things that are largely commoditized. I think it's time to start thinking about how do you transform your security architecture for new demands, things like application transformation, or how do you make better use of networks and connectivity? In other words, how do you free up a lot of your spend to make bets? Because I sometimes draw a pyramid and say, all right, below this line, let's actually figure out where the line is. Below this line, you don't really have the ability to move money around, but above this line, you do. How high up is that line? Is it 5% of your budget is discretionary? Is it 20? The lower that line comes, the more control you have to be adaptive and to manage risk and to take bets. And this is an area where you probably should take bets. Now, does the company have a strategy around artificial intelligence? Is there a CTO? And should you be sitting on that panel? Is there an ethics board around it for privacy and should, not just can you, but should you do something? Are you talking to peers in the industry, other CIOs or CISOs and CTOs? Because I think we're humans. We do things through dialogue. It's painful, but that's how we do things. So being part of those conversations is super important, and having control of your budget to place the bets when the time comes. If a vendor walks in and can actually solve problems, how do you test it? Do you have the ability to spend a little money, see if it works, see if it delivers what they say, and then back it or reject it? And that's a very difficult thing for most CISOs to do.
Makes sense. I know we're coming up on time. I guess the last question.
It always goes fast, Misha.
Well, time goes fast when you're having fun, right?
Exactly.
So on the other side of the table, for the vendors, what does it mean? Are we going to see, well, the same way we saw like zero trust was kind of a capture. It was like in the zeitgeist. If you go to RSM, if you go to Black Hat, everything is zero trust, and then it was cloud security, and then
the Gestalt had it. Yeah.
Do you think we go to RSA next year and everything will be AI enabled? Or
I think it is. This will probably age quickly, but today, as we record this, is the deadline for RSA conference. I suspect a large percentage of the sessions being submitted for 2024 are going to be AI related. Interestingly, 1 year ago, none were. And I know this because it just wasn't a topic, and no fault of the conferences. The conference actually produced a lot of AI content for the 2023 conference, but that was because they recognized the emerging trend between the deadline submission and the conference itself. And having made a couple of submissions this year, it's right there front and center as one of the keywords in the submission document. For instance, you can choose machine learning and LLMs. It's in there, so you're going to see it. You're going to see it this year, and it should be in there because it's not. This is what Gartner calls the plateau of productivity. Eventually, this stuff gets a specific application, large amounts of data to be trained on, or it used to say trained on, but let's say there's a large body of information to guide the training of the artificial intelligence, and the data models exist. And so it should be part of the conversation for how to do, defensive AI, how to use AI in defense, how do we handle AI in offense. And when it gets boring and comes out of the hype cycle, I'm actually excited about that, because that's when it becomes part of what we do. But we are still in that first year since it really became part of our discussions beyond just machine learning in the historical sense.
And from the defending side, again, if we pull the curtain and confront the person behind the curtain,
that's a Wizard of Oz reference.
Yeah,
that implies
exactly.
that it's not real, but yeah.
So which application you mentioned? Offensive tools. You mentioned I know phishing attacks. What will be kind of the first application?
I think this
real true application and true gain in effectiveness or productivity on the tool side, on the vendor side.
Yeah, so I think, well, first of all, the vendors that have scale, that have the mathematics, and that have the data are the ones that I think are going to lead the way in terms of advances in value. But I think the places that you're really going to see it are in anywhere where there's complex policy sets, I mean machine policy sets, that require non-deterministic definition. So instead of having to describe A and B then C all over the place, how do you create a formally verifiable system that will generate those in a way that you have comfort in? So that's one. Two is certainly in data protection. I think three is maybe deception. One of the big problems in deception, by the way, that caused it to not be practical was that whenever the lures were put in front of the bad guys, they could go, oh yeah, that's the one made by the machine. That's the fake password that's not really used by a human. That's not a real file. That's not a real machine name. That's not a real network. Well, now an LLM can almost render it like you're in a World of Warcraft type world with around the avatar, the world's being rendered. It looks believable to the attacker because it's modeled and built by an LLM potentially, and that's interesting. And incident response, as we've discussed. But I think the less visible stuff is going to continue, advances in machine learning and anti-fraud as well. But so that's the fun stuff.
Interesting. So it's almost like creating very believable honeypots that are interactive and appear genuine.
I mean, how cool would it be? Our job's to slow the attacker down. So predict where they're going, get ahead of them, and then provide them the false trail and path into entirely false worlds that look exactly like the networks that you expect, in a way that they aren't aware they're in a virtual world. And so the things we tried to do in deception, that for some reason, just the hackers were like, oh, you're giving me 10 fake passwords? I'll take the real one, please. How did they do it? Because the machines weren't good at creating the fake passwords. Now they will be. And you can render that world in a far more, it's almost like gaming. I mean, the original gaming interfaces were not very believable. Now they're almost photorealistic. It could be the same thing with deception. So I think breach prediction, incident response, improvements in anti-malware, improvements in anti-fraud, I think data protection in particular, and complex policy sets, those are things happening right now. And by the way, that's just 5 or 6 out of hundreds that certainly I've documented and I'm keeping track of. But those are the fun ones in the short term.
Amazing. Well, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that your submissions will get accepted, so we'll get to.
I hope so. I mean, I try to do some fun stuff. We'll see.
Is there a voting system? Can we upvote submissions to?
No, but there is a program committee. They're all great people, and I'm happy to send chocolate. I'm kidding. Doesn't work that way. It doesn't. Having been on the program committee in the past, it is one of the most rigorous bodies and processes I've seen, and they work really hard at it. But I always try to put something interesting in there, and hopefully it also presses us to deliver better quality when we present. So you always push a little bit further than I think your comfort zone is, and that's really good for all of us who submit.
Awesome. Well, I'm rooting for you. So
thank you.
So, and hopefully, I mean, one way or another, I'm sure we'll see. We'll connect at RSA.
I'm looking forward to it, Misha.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you for having me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also follow 6gen on LinkedIn and follow some of our content there. We do also produce a Last Week in Security blog at the 6gen.io/news. And then also we'll be at the Hack the Railroad event at Missy in Maryland next month.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.